The sun rose hard and white over Dustwater, Arizona territory. Spring 1884 so bright it bleached the peeling paint of the clapboard church and carved knife-edged shadows across the packed dirt street. Heat was still hours away, yet the air already held that metallic taste storms sometimes leave behind like breath drawn before a shout. Dustwater was rarely noisy, but this morning the town thrummed with a hush thick enough to hear boot leather creak. A half-circle of townsfolk pressed close to the churchyard fence. Farmers with shirt sleeves rolled above weather-chewed wrists. Matrons in black bombazine, clutching prayer books like shields, 3 dust-smeared cowhands balanced on a rain barrel, and a freckled boy gnawing licorice so fiercely his jaw clicked. Every gaze fixed on a single upright post, its pine darkened by sweat and the ghosts of old. Punishment's crack. A braid of rawhide whistled through the stillness and kissed Abigail Kennedy's shoulders. She made no sound. Her wrists roped above. Her head had been bound so long the fibers cut furrows in her skin. Yet her chin stayed lifted, neck corded with stubborn defiance. Blood bloomed through the yellow calico of her dress, each petal of crimson proof she was still flesh and not a dream. Somewhere behind the crowd an infant wailed. Its mother shushed it as though Abigail herself were contagion. The traveling preacher Reverend Josiah Pike, lanky as barbed wire, raised the whip again. His voice rang through the yard, thick with righteous venom. The wages of rebellion is pain. Let her pride be scourged from bone and marrow. Crack. Dustwater leaned closer, hunger behind their eyes. The same hunger that watches prairie fires race the night. Abigail stared past them, beyond swinging saloon doors. Beyond the livery's broken hitch, rail toward the purple teeth of distant mesas, in those sharp silhouettes she'd long ago hidden her last scrap of hope. When you have nothing left to lose, she told herself, with each lash, the world can't take you whole. She inhaled the coppery scent of her own blood, let it sharpen her senses rather than dull them. I am still here. A faint, deliberate hoofbeat echoed up Main Street. Out of the bleached haze rode a rider on a slate-gray Mustang. Wyatt Cole. Coat the sun had bleached nearly bone-white, hat brim pulled low enough to shadow eyes rumored the color. Of Riverstone, a Henry rifle rode easy in a saddle scabbard. A Colt peacemaker hugged his hip. Legend said a mini-ball at Shiloh had robbed him of speech, leaving his silence to speak for him. Some called that silence haunted, others whispered holy. People projected what they feared or needed into a man who never answered back. Wyatt, dismounted with unhurried grace, boots kissing ground like gavels, the preacher's arm froze, mid-swing. Wyatt's steps 3, 4 tapped hollow on the church steps until he placed himself between Abigail and the next lash. He didn't draw iron, did not speak, simply looked. First at Reverend Pike, then at Sheriff Cormac Hayes, then at the gawking semicircle of townsfolk eyes, traveling like a surveyor's level, as if weighing every soul and finding them wanting. Silence scraped nerves raw. Wind rattled a loose shutter on the mercantile. Sheriff cleared his throat, hitching Silver Star higher on his vest. Much obliged for the concern. Stranger, he said, voice thin. But this ain't your quarrel. Step aside. Wyatt rolled one shoulder, shrugged off his long duster. Pale morning light revealed forearms latticed with old scars, some knife slick, others bullet-tragged. Leather creaked as he lifted a gloved palm, fingers splayed in a single wordless command. Stop. 3 heartbeats passed. Sweat beaded on Reverend Pike's lip. A drifting cloud blotted the sun, and thunder murmured far offer. It's a reminder that bigger reckonings roamed these deserts than mortal courts. The preacher's resolve wilted. The whip sagged. Mothers hugged children closer. Something older than law trembled beneath Wyatt's stillness, an echo of battlefields and buried brothers. At last, Sheriff Hayes took one cautious step back. Untie her, he ordered the deacons. Do it, and be quick. Hands shook as the rope was sawed through. Abigail's legs gave, but Wyatt caught her easily, lifting her like a child. Her breath hitched when his shirt front soaked red where her cheek touched it. Only then did she realize tears streaked her dirt-caked face. Wyatt thumbed one a waistcoat. Rough as sandstone, touch impossibly gentle. A wind hissed down Dustwater's single street, twirling dust devils through sun-bleached sage. Wyatt swung into the saddle, settling Abigail before him with practiced care. She felt the iron of his revolver against her hip, the solid beat of his heart against her spine steady as a church clock refusing to break. He pressed spurred heels. The Mustang lunged. Behind them, the church bell began to toll, loud clanging, unsure whether it declared alarm or benediction. Reverend Pike shouted something lost in hoof thunder. Sheriff Hayes half-heartedly reached for his sidearm, then let it fall. They tore past the blacksmith, past awestruck children, past the telegraph office where spools of wire rattled in the sudden walk Abigail's hair streaming like a comet's tail. High above, a vulture lifted from the steeple, startled into awkward flight. Dustwater shrank behind them, swallowed by dust and distance. The rust-colored horizon yawned wide promise and peril in equal measurement, the pounding of the mustangs. Hooves sounded like a second heartbeat in Abigail's ears. She did not know where the silent cowboy would take her, or why a man who owned no voice had spoken so loudly on her behalf. She only knew that for the first time since fever carried her parents away, future felt less like an iron cage and more like an open gate. Fade out on horse and rider vanishing into the blooming heat mirage. Church bell tolling one final, uncertain note behind them. Mid-afternoon found the pair deep inside Coyote Draw, a maze of red rock spires crooked as cathedral fingers. Heat shimmer bent the world. Stones seemed to drift like sails on a mirage sea. Abigail slumped against the saddle horn, half-conscious, each metronomic hoofbeat drumming pain through her skull. Sweat glued her hair to the lash cuts on her back. But Wyatt's arm and iron bar across her waist kept her from slithering to the dust below. In a universe liquefied by sun, it was the one solid thing. Then the horizon changed color. A wall of jaundiced sky clawed up from the south, climbing fast, devouring blue. The smell arrived first to ozone and scorched earth, and a hiss like a million matches flaring at once. Dust storm. Wyatt veered the Mustang into a knife-thin side canyon moments before the tempest landed. Sand hammered the ravine, scouring rock, whining through crevices like banshee pipes. He flung himself and Abigail behind a shoulder-high boulder. Wind snatched the ribbon from her braid. Her skirt whipped her legs as though the storm itself wished to continue the preacher's punishment. She tried to ask, "Why did you risk everything for me?" But grit filled her mouth, turning words to coughs. Wyatt pulled a red bandana from his coat, knotted it over her nose and lips. Eyes soft as river silt even while the sky raged. 15 eternal minutes later, the wind guttered out. Leaving silence so sudden, Abigail's ears rang, yet the danger wasn't finished. Black anvils of cloud squatted overhead, bruised and bulbous with promise. Wyatt caught her gaze, lifted 3 fingers, then formed a chopping motion downward. Flash flowed Old Army sign language as clear as any shout. He pointed toward higher rock terraces. Abigail nodded. And in that wordless exchange, a new thread of trust cinched tight. Light drained from the desert as though poured down a well. Thunder cracked. Raindrops thick as bullets splattered the canyon, turned dust to chocolate sludge. In minutes, the dry wash below their ledge became a river in frantic birth brown, foaming, hungry. Lightning forked, fracturing sky and stone. In equal measure, Wyatt wedged his boot into a crevice, heaved Abigail upward. Mud froth licked their heels, climbed 2 knees, then thighs. A half-submerged juniper trunk shot past, battering rock with a sick drumbeat. Abigail's boots slipped. She felt herself sliding into the torrent, then a vice on her wrist. Wyatt hauled, muscles quivering, till she sprawled beside him on a shelf scarcely wider than a coffin lid. There they crouched, drenched, shaking, water roaring 5 feet beneath. Thunder boomed like distant artillery, and each flash etched Wyatt's profile in silver, the rigid jaw, the scar puckering his throat, the wet hair plastered against temples. Abigail's back throbbed rawhide burns awakening under cold rain, but she forced her shaking hand up, pressed fingers gently to the ruined flesh at his neck. His eyes fluttered shut, lashes clumped with rain. In that fragile contact, Abigail sensed gratitude, grief, and something softer. All wordless yet loud as the flood itself, Hours ebbed. The storm trudged north. Water fell, then seeped, then only whispered along the canyon floor. Stars pricked holes in retreating cloud, their light reflected in puddles like lanterns left for lost travelers. Wyatt guided her along slick ledges to a limestone cave high on the canyon wall. The entrance was a jagged grin. Inside smelled of damp clay and ancient bat guano, but it was dry. He struck flint against knife, coaxing sparks into the shredded lining of his duster until a pebble-sized flame licked cedar kindling. Soon a palm-high fire crackled, painting the walls in wavering amber. Abigail sat cross-legged, dress clinging like a second skin. Steam coiled off her shoulders, carrying iron-scented pain into the cave roof. She studied her rescuer, openly no-angular cheekbones mapped by shadow. A streak of premature gray-threading dark hair, eyes the color of river stones after rain, polished, inscrutable but alive. He angled a stick through the embers, then bent and scratched a single word in the ash-powdered sand. Wyatt, she realized he was offering not orders, but name identity. Her throat scraped, but she forced sound through it.
Abigail.
The syllables felt fragile, newly hatched, yet saying them made her reel again. Wyatt touched fingers to his scarred throat, shook his head, no voice. She nodded, the truth had already spoken through his deeds. Returned, she offered her own. Fragments of a life measured in loss, orphaned at 14 by fever. Indentured in the parsonage kitchen because grief blurred into obedience. Branded sinner for rejecting marriage. To a man who smelled of rot gut and easy cruelty, her words stumbled, but Wyatt's gaze never wavered, and his hands steady. Almost reverent tightened a blanket around her shoulders when her own shivers betrayed her. Outside, a solitary coyote lifted a wavering howl. The note rose, wobbled, then fell half lament, half hymn. Abigail hugged the blanket tighter. Maybe, she whispered into the fire's crackle, silence can be a kind of mercy. Wyatt considered, then knelt. With the blunt end of his stick, he etched another word beside his name, tomorrow, and, beneath it, a flat-topped shape of a mesa with an arrow pointing north. Abigail traced the outline. Keep moving, find high ground again. Perhaps New Mexico. Maybe a mission that shelters runaways. She met his eyes. Together, she asked. A tremor of both hope and dread. He didn't nod exactly, just let the barest curve touch one corner of his mouth. As delicate as starlight on water, then tossed another sliver of cedar onto the fire. Exhaustion, thick as syrup, finally dragged her down. She slid along the cool limestone wall, blanket to chin. Firelight danced across Wyatt's profile where he sat sentinel at the cave mouth. Henry rifle across his knees, gaze fixed on slivers of sky. In the hush, she caught the rhythm of his breathing, slow, deliberate, a lullaby forged on battlefields. Beyond the cave lips, coyote draw settled into post-storm hush, frogs chirring, water dripping from newly carved shelves. She let the small noises braid into dream thread. The last thing Abigail felt before sleep swallowed her was the certainty that, somewhere north beneath that same recovering sky, fate was rearranging roads to make room for two fugitives, one who had lost his voice and one who had just found hers, fade to black on the cave's embers, pulsing like a muted heartbeat. Morning seeped across the desert like spilled paint, blushing every ridge and arroyo in rose-gold radiance. The Mustang's hooves clicked over crusted silt as Wyatt guided them north, shadows stretching long as memories. Last night's flood still flecked the wash with silver pools, and each reflected sunbeam stung Abigail's swollen lashes. Her spine ached, but the rhythm of motion steadied her thoughts. One more breath, one more mile, until fear grew tired. Of chasing hope, fear, however, had fresh horses. 10 rugged miles behind, Deputy Nathan Granger reined in atop a rise. Sunglare haloed his ash-blonde beard, but nothing saintly lived in his eyes. 6 riders fanned out in grim silhouette farmhands drunk on posse fever and jingling preacher coin. Granger spat a rope of tobacco juice that hissed in the dust. "Bring the girl back alive," he barked. "Hang the mute if he so much as blinks wrong," spurs clinked. The hunt resumed. Oblivious, Abigail and Wyatt watered the Mustang at a stand of cottonwoods, whose leaves whispered like gossip. Buffalo grass nodded beneath a teasing breeze. That was when a figure slid from the underbrushland, bronze-skinned, black hair woven with crow feathers, Spencer carbine loose in sun-browned hands. A necklace of coyote teeth rattled softly against his chest. Adrenaline jolted Abigail upright. Wyatt lifted a calming palm piece. The stranger's gaze swept over lash marks. Rifle, silent Manan, equation solved in a breath. "I am Red Hawk," he said, voice low, measured. "The posse dogs your trail. Storm mud kept your sign bright as white paint." Wyatt tilted his head. "Why aid us?" Red Hawk shrugged one shoulder. "I owe nothing to men who whip women for praying different." From a pouch he produced strips of smoked elk, tossing them toward Abigail. "Eat. Strength spoils quick in this country." Trust proved chewier than the meat. Yet as sun lowered and wolf howls stitched the horizon, Red Hawk stayed. He directed them up a sandstone shelf overlooking a bowl of moonlit sage. Together they set torches into a ring of rocks, mall suns, to deter prowling cats. While sparks snaked skyward, Abigail threaded a sliver of bone needle with gut, then stitched a canyon-torn gash along Wyatt's tricep. He endured in absolute silence, marvel flickering in his eyes whenever hers dared meet them. Night spread a quilt of salt-white stars. Red Hawk taught Abigail to read their angles for hidden springs. "See that tilt? Water sleeps beneath." Conversation meandered in brief tributaries names of constellations. The way crows remember face is yet most communion lived in shared chores. The quiet half-grin he gave when she mimicked a hawk's screech and startled the Mustang. Somewhere in that hush a fragile fellowship unfurled. Pre-dawn blue seeped into the eastern rim. A coyote yipped. Then crack-crack rifle reports ripped the silence apart. Abigail dropped to her stomach as shale splintered overhead. Wyatt rolled her behind a limestone slab, yanked the Henry free, levered around as naturally as breathing. Red Hawk melted into waist-high sage. A flicker of ghosts between gun flashes, muzzle bursts pulsed in the dark like orange phantoms. Wyatt exhaled, squeezed the trigger, once, twice, thrice. Two posse horses shrieked and bolted, tack jangling into the gloom. Granger cursed, whipping his men forward. A bullet hissed past Abigail's ear, banged stone, and ricocheted to Nick. Wyatt's cheek, drawing a slender crimson line. Shock froze her. Then she saw a Red Hawk's spare Colt half buried in sand where he'd crawled away. She scooped it up. Metal rattled against bones, trembling with terrors older than memory. Abigail inhaled through cracked lips. No saints left to petition, only resolve, and fired toward the tallest torch. Glass exploded, kerosene flames snuffed out, leaving the gulch-clawed arc. Startled horses reared. One rider toppled, howling as he hit stone. For a moment the world held its breath. Even wind seemed afraid to move. Hearts hammered in ears like war drums. Then retreat sounds, hoofbeats, panicked shouts echoed down the ravine. Granger's voice clanged through blackness. Half rage, half fear. Fall back. Regroup. Silence. Returned vaster now, punctured only by the pop of dying embers. Shadows converged until Red Hawk emerged, crouched, Spencer still smoking. His stare touched Abigail an ember of approval. "Good shot," she blinked, weapon lowering. "Lucky." "Luck favors courage," he replied, tone flat yet kind. Wyatt reached, brushed her soot-grimed knuckles. "Safe." She nodded, though legs vibrated like plucked wire. Red Hawk pointed west, where the sky brewed scarlet and indigo. Mesa Santa Cruz. High ground. They will come again. We choose the battleground. Wyatt's hand hovered near Abigail's, question implicit ready. A shuddering breath escaped her, but inside it steel uncoiled. She slid her fingers between his, squeezed. "I won't run from them twice." He gathered gear, smothered torches, and at first blush of morning trudged up the draw. Dawn burned like molten iron across cloud bellies, staining the desert A. Violent crimson. In that fury of color, the mesa rose flat-topped, imposing. locally dubbed Mercy's Table for legends that said the earth there listened to dying confessions and carried whispers straight into the storm as they climbed. Studied the two men flanking her. Wyatt, silent, watchful, embodied the steadfast heartbeat she'd leaned on since the whip cracked. Hawk moved like desert wind, neither servant nor master, only purpose. She realized the iron ringing through this wilderness wasn't merely of rifles and spurs. It was the echo left when people struck against injustice and found uncommon allies. And she, once powerless, now carried a revolver's sting and a will forged in pain. Behind them, far off, Granger's posse regrouped under banners of dust. Ahead, the mesa weighted its cliffs like jaws, its summit like judgment. Whatever final reckoning lay atop that stone altar, Abigail felt the weight of possibility settle into her bones. Pain could be welded into defiance, silence into vow, strangers into something eerily close to family. The sun cleared the rim, flooding everything in brutal light. They did not flinch. 3 silhouettes, woman, warrior, mute gunslinger, marched toward Mercy's table, casting shadows long and unbroken, while somewhere behind, wounded pride and silver coins kicked up dust to follow, fade out on rising silhouettes framed against the blood-red dawn. Storm clouds dragged their black bellies across Mesa Santa Cruz just as the 3 fugitives hauled themselves onto its wind-carved summit. The plateau felt less like earth than a stone ship adrift in a bruised sky-sheer cliffs on 3 sides. A single goat trail spine twisting down the 4th. Perfect or foolish, Abigail thought. There would be no halfway choice tonight. Wyatt planted his Henry on a natural gun shelf and scanned the switchbacks below. Eyes hard as forged iron, Red Hawk moved in a tireless crouch, stringing yucca cord, tripwires between waist-high rocks and wedging caltrop stones where hooves would clatter. Abigail, palms split and raw, lugged fist-sized stones into piles, whispering the names of those she refused to surrender. Mother, father. The girl I used to beach, name a reason not to tremble. The air thickened until lightning licked the horizon in silent rehearsal. Then came the glow, torches bobbing on the lower trail. 5 now, teeth bared against the rising wind. Deputy Nathan Granger barked orders, the gusts shredded, but hatred gave them weight enough to rise. The first trap snapped like a rifle bolt. One rider flailed into space, arms windmilling before darkness swallowed his scream. A second horse hit. Caltrops reared, toppled backward, its rider howling, yet the remaining torches climbed, stubborn as fever. Lightning forked, freezing their ascent in ghostly tableau. Wyatt's rifle cracked. A torch snuffed out, tumbling end over end into the abyss. Granger pushed onward, hate shielding him from the chill that raced ahead of the storm. At the rim, he vaulted the last boulder, Colt leveled. End of the line, preacher thief. He roared, half to Abigail, half to the thunder. Wyatt stepped from cover, silent as always, broad shoulders filling the gap between Granger and everything he wanted. Rain spatters hissed on hot rock. Granger sneered, eyes glinting. Last, coward. Abigail crouched unseen behind the deputy. The church rope still knotted to her wrist since Dustwater itching like a living scar. Memory of each lash flared through her bloodstream, fuel now, not fear. She looped the frayed length around a jagged stone protrusion. Granger advanced, boots scuffing slate. Abigail yanked with every ounce of fury left in her bones. The rope snapped taut. Granger's feet whipped forward. His revolver barked wild into storm clouds as he crashed onto his back, breath blasting out in a grunt. Wyatt lunged. Rain-slick stone became a wrestling ground for 2 silhouettes, slashed by lightning, one fueled by rage, the other by silent resolve. Granger drew a hidden buoy slashing upward. Steel kissed Wyatt's side, opening a dark smile through coat and flesh. Wyatt barely flinched, suddenly volcanic with words he could never voice. He hammered the pistols heavy. Grip against Granger's temple, the deputy sagged. Blood and rain mingling on sandstone like spilled ink. Thunder cracked overhead, and the heavens unleashed. Rain sheeted sideways, quenching torches, hissing off hot barrels. Red Hawk appeared from the gloom, arrow notched. stance cold as judgment. The two remaining posse men, terror finally outweighing coin, raised trembling hands. Red Hawk herded them, along with a dazed Granger, toward the goat path. "Carry your shame back to Dustwater," he said in a voice that held centuries. "Tell them the desert rejects their cruelty." Lightning flared again. On the mesas. Edge Abigail knelt beside Wyatt. Blood pumped through his fingers where he clutched his side. She pressed her shawl against the wound. Crimson seeped, then diluted under rain. "Stay with me." "Please." Wyatt lifted one shaking hand to her cheek, brushed away wet strands of hair. Then he pointed east, where dawn's first bruise bled, pale behind retreating thunderheads. With trembling fingertip, he traced 3 letters on her open palm. Geo. Her throat closed around ice. "They'll hang you," she breathed. He answered with the barest shake of his head. Acceptance, not surrender. A voiceless drifter who'd struck a deputy would never know a fair trial. But a woman still might find sanctuary beyond the sermons of Dustwater. Red Hawk returned, binding Granger's wrists with rawhide. "I can guide him to the border," he said, nodding to Wyatt, spirit willing. Rain glazed the Lakotas. Stern face, but his eyes softened toward Abigail. Your road forks elsewhere. Wind whipped her skirt like torn sails. Abigail bent, pressed her lips to Wyatt's scarred palm, the first place he had ever touched her. She tasted iron, rain, and 1,000 unspoken vows. Standing, she unclasped the church rope from her wrist and coiled it at his feet, a shed. Skin proof that what once bound her now weighed nothing. "Hold me in silence," she whispered, voice breaking, "and I'll hold you in memory." Wyatt's answering nod was small, eternal. She turned toward the goat path. Boots slid, stones clattered, tears vanished into the storm's weeping. Halfway down, she looked back. Lightning etched the mesa's summit. Wyatt, tall, even wounded, arm braced on Red Hawk's shoulder to lone sentinels cut from obsidian. Against the sky just beginning to lighten, Abigail pulled the blanket of night around her shoulders and kept walking toward a horizon that no longer felt like a cage, but a question she intended to answer with her own heartbeat. In a land that worshipped punishment, one man's silence thundered louder than any sermon. A whip birthed a journey, a flood washed wounds clean, and on a mesa named for mercy. A woman learned what freedom truly costs. Dustwater will remember the day its church bell rang off-key. But Abigail Kennedy will remember a scarred hand that never let go until letting go meant life. If this tale of courage, sacrifice, and the quiet power of trust moved you, ride with us. Like this video, subscribe for more frontier stories, and share your thoughts below. What would you surrender? What would you hold when the storm comes? Till next time, keep your campfires bright and your hearts braver still.